Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Council of Elrond, a Lord of the Rings podcast. In this episode, we are going to be discussing all the major differences between the book and the film in regards to the two towers. Please let us know on our Facebook page, the Mellon Heads, on Twitter at Mellon_Heads, or on Instagram at Mellon Heads Official if there are any big changes that we could include in our next discussion. Right, on to the episode.
Get on with it!
So the first change I want to talk about is the Two Towers itself. The very meaning of the title, The Two Towers, is changed in the film adaptation. Before I get into this, I must let everyone know who hasn't read the books that there are 3 volumes, but they are split into 6 books, 2 books per volume. And Tolkien thought of each of these volumes as an individual book, but publishers preferred a trilogy for economic reasons. It's actually due to the fact that I think after the war there was like less paper, so he kind of had to dumb it down to a few books. But what are the Two Towers? In the trailer for the movie, Galadriel says, "There is a union now between the two towers, Barad-dûr, fortress of the Dark Lord Sauron, and Orthanc, stronghold of the wizard Saruman. It is also heavily implied throughout the 3 movies that Orthanc and Barad-dûr are the two towers, but Tolkien never specified exactly which towers he was referring to in the title of the book." So going through some fan forums that haven't been updated since like 2002, which was really cool, like seeing fans debating over, you know, the next movie that was coming out. It was like stepping back in time. What a time to be alive.
Yeah, I've gone through some of those forums as well. And you can see people asking these questions and you're thinking, why don't you just Google the answer? And it's like, obviously Google just didn't have that much material up there yet. Like, there weren't so many different resources for, especially for Lord of the Rings content. But it's cool that now we basically, any answer you want to know, you'll find it at the end of a Google search.
And it just must be so exciting living in that time, wondering what the next movie is going to be like.
Yeah,
just imagine scheming and coming up with theories with your friends and being like, oh, I wonder, is Aragorn going to die in the next one or what?
Yeah, I just listened to a podcast yesterday actually about and it was this guy. He's a Tolkien professor and he specializes in The Hobbit. And he was doing like a live class with loads of students, and they were talking about the first movie, the first Hobbit movie, and so it was before the second movie had come out, and they were kind of talking about like things that like they could do in the second movie. But it was cool. It was like such an exciting time where they're all just debating what's possibly going to happen in the next movie. So it was cool. It was a different time.
They're taking the hobbits to Isengard!
Going through these forums and various places deep in the web, I found that Tolkien wrote, quote, "The Two Towers gets as near as possible to finding a title to cover the widely divergent books 3 and 4 and can be left ambiguous." That was a letter to his publisher, and in a later letter, Tolkien told him that he wasn't happy with the title as he wasn't sure which towers it referred to, so he didn't even really know himself.
That's cool. That's really cool.
Yeah.
So he's like, it could be like Minas Morgul or
exactly.
You know, that's class.
In the 2 volumes of the Two Towers, there's so many towers that are talked about in detail, such as Orthanc, Cirith Ungol, Barad-dûr, and Minas Morgul, like you said. But Tolkien published a note at the end of the Fellowship book that clearly describes the towers as Orthanc and Minas Morgul. And then that's also what the illustrations on the book covers were. So that was his opinion, whereas I suppose Jackson
of Orthanc or
Orthanc and Minas Morgul.
Okay.
Whereas Jackson kind of made it obvious that it was Orthanc and Barad-dûr.
Barad-dûr.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's really interesting. I think I may have read that before a long time ago, but I completely forgotten about it. And it's really interesting that like Tolkien himself, he's maybe like a fan. He's like, I don't know which towers they are.
Yeah.
I don't know which one is the writer referring to when he says the two towers. He's like, I don't even know. Yeah, that's really cool.
Let us know what other towers you think it might be if you don't think it's Minas Morgul or Barad-dûr. I think Orthanc is definitely one of them, but yeah, let us know your opinion. And what do you think? Do you think it's a good change?
I mean, I like the fact that well, when things are ambiguous, it's always going to be a little bit like it's going to throw you off a little bit. So when you definitely know the two towers, what's it about? It's about the union of Barad-dûr and Orthanc, and you're kind of like, right, Saruman's now evil, and you know he's in league with Sauron. It's quite clear about what it is and what's going to happen in that movie. So I kind of like that. Like, as in, if Peter Jackson was just like, right, there's some ambiguity here. I'm just going to make the decision and say these are definitely the two towers, and that's what our movie is going to be about. So I think it's quite a good change.
Yeah, I think it's good to be less vague, especially if you're naming the book The Two Towers and you don't even know what two towers they are. But I suppose when you have a movie coming out called The Two Towers, you have to know which one they are.
Yeah, and of course, in like Tolkien's world, there's so much more information and there's so much more things that you could debate. So fans of the books could have that kind of a debate and have a conversation. Whereas if you're releasing a movie and they don't even really give too much importance to, for example, Minas Morgul, you're hardly going to say that's one of the two towers because like the fans just won't really understand why, or they won't really get it. So it's probably good in terms of as a movie to say these are the two towers.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think we'll give a point to Jackson there for that one.
And the union of the two towers.
So the next change I want to talk about is Elrond's feelings towards Aragorn. Not relationship feelings or anything, but in the film, Elrond is strongly against Arwen marrying Aragorn and warns her that she will face the ages alone after the death of a mortal man. But in actual fact, Elrond in the books gives Aragorn his full approval on one condition, that he would be the king of both Gondor and Arnor. So I think Jackson didn't really want the complexities of explaining that Aragorn was destined to be king of two kingdoms, and he wanted to portray the sacrifice that Arwen was making by loving Aragorn. So I think it makes it more romantic, especially this forbidden love. I think it's a good change, and it would kind of complicate things. And I think it adds an extra storyline in there for Arwen to have. I don't think she's as big and prominent in the book, so
yeah, and
it's good to have her having like these daddy issues in there.
the tension with the father-in-law is always a good one for a movie as well.
Exactly.
Rather than the father-in-law just be like, I think you're great.
Yeah.
Please marry my daughter. Like, you're the king, whatever. So yeah, again, from a movie standpoint, I think it's probably a good change.
Yeah, because if I was Arwen's father, I would definitely be like, take him. I want Aragorn to be part of my family.
Exactly. Yeah. I want him around the Christmas tree on Christmas morning.
Yeah, I want him as my Secret Santa.
Keep it secret. Keep it safe.
We know Aragorn isn't just a mortal man, obviously, in the movies from the extended scene in The Two Towers when he tells Eowyn that he's 87. One of the Dunedain, blessed with long life and yada yada. But do you know what age Aragorn is when he dies?
No, he's at least 230 or something like that.
Oh, close. 210. That was a good guess.
210, right? Okay, yeah. I knew he'd made it over the 200 mark.
Yeah, that's good, because I remember hearing that for the first time in the movies that he was 87, and I kind of thought to myself, right, he just ages well, and maybe he'll still die at like 120 or something, but like he still looks in his like 40s when he's 87. I don't know, but yeah, I didn't realize he was I didn't realize the Dunedain were blessed with that long.
Yeah, it's really long. It's really long.
And Arwen actually died 1 year later as well. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and Elrond talks about how she's going to, face the ages alone after the death of Aragorn, but she ended up dying a year later.
Elrond, for all his foresight, he couldn't see that coming, could he?
No, he couldn't. Did you say foresight or forehead?
I said foresight. Hugo Weaving for all his forehead.
Hugo Weaving. For all my forehead, I could not see it. Weird fact as well, nothing to do with any changes, but I thought it was strange that Arwen is in fact a distant cousin of Aragorn.
That's fine. Don't worry about it. It's grand.
Exactly.
I mean, if we've all seen things like Game of Thrones, it's like
that's normal.
I mean, that's a bit more brother sisterly. Right here, it's like distant relations, and it's like
Yeah, I suppose true. Keep it in the bloodline, folks.
Distant relations.
Yeah, if you guys know what the relationship is between the two, let us know. But what do you think about that change? Would you be in favor, or do you think it'd be better to have Elrond just being like, I love you, Aragorn? The fact that Jackson left out that Aragorn needed to be king of both Gondor and Arnor.
Yeah, again, it is a small change, and I think he kind of just changes it slightly because, like, when we get to the third movie, Peter Jackson makes it that Elrond is the one who kind of, brings the newly forged sword to Aragorn, and that's the moment where it seems like he's kind of really giving him his blessing and saying, you need to become the king. He says, put aside the ranger and be who you were born to be, and all that kind of thing. So he kind of does include it later on in the next movie, but so it's just a small element again, maybe for character development for Elrond in it as well, to give him another little small arc rather than in the books where he's always in favor of Aragorn. So again, I don't know if he had done it exactly the way it is in the books. Again, I don't think it would have come across badly or anything like that. But I can see the reason for it. Again, I can see the reason for the change in terms of from a movie standpoint.
And what you said about him bringing the sword to him, I think we discussed in last week's podcast as well, how Aragorn got the sword in the third movie and it kind of almost completed an arc for Elrond. Sorry, forgot his name for a minute. But that'll actually come up in a later point as well, which is interesting. But I do like the change, I have to say myself. So the next one I wanted to talk about was that really cool scene with the Warg Riders, the big Warg attack. So that whole Warg Riders versus Rohirrim scene was completely added in. And Sharku was the captain of the Warg Riders and was totally made up by the film writers. This change also altered the death of Hama, as he's eaten by a wolf at the start of this scene, whereas he's killed defending the gates at the Battle of Helm's Deep in the books. It also means that Aragorn is wounded and left for dead and has this whole romantic scene with Brago and all that jazz, and he goes missing for a little while. But are you a fan of this scene, or what did you think?
Oh, I mean, it's a class scene, isn't it? Like it's
class.
I think the Two Towers, obviously, we know that there's the whole battle at Helm's Deep, which is so action-packed for like the final hour of that movie. But I think it's pretty slow pace a lot of the movie before that, and there's a lot of scenes of like important slow scenes, like with dialogue between Frodo and Sam and Smeagol and things like that. So I think they put in that action scene at that stage just to kind of keep viewers really involved and keep people excited. But I think it's a brilliant addition. I think it's really cool. Also, in last week's episode, we discussed some changes from the first movie, and they actually omitted a couple of scenes in the Fellowship where there were warg attacks and there were a few other things that they left out. So it was nice to put in that warg attack in the second movie because they had left it out from the first one.
Kind of like a homage almost to the first book.
Yes. Exactly. An homage.
An emoji.
Yeah. A homage. An emoji. Yeah, I think it was cool. It's like, Legolas is obviously so cool. I just love a close-up of Legolas shooting, firing his bow. I think it's like...
I was literally going to just say that. Him shooting the bow in slow motion with the drums in the background is class.
Yeah. Although I've always got a problem with the way he hops onto the horse. I just think it defies physics.
My next question to you was, what do you think of Legolas's horse mount?
That's always one of those things that just kind of like, I'm like, why does he go that way? He should, the horse is dragging him. He should always, spin around the opposite direction.
It's just kind of a dumb physics thing, and
It's science.
do you know what it reminds me of, actually? Do you know the movie Batman: The Dark Knight? It's such a class movie, but then there's that one scene when he's on that bat bike thing and he's shooting at the Joker, and then he just runs into the wall and does a little flip, and the bike like turns around and comes down again. You're like, why did they put that in? Could he not just have turned around? Or I don't know. It just kind of feels like that.
Yeah, it was a little bit. I don't know. Like, I mean, I'm never gonna say I don't like that. Like, but it's just like, it's always one of those things that, like, from the first time I saw the movie, I was like, that was really weird. That didn't really make sense in terms of physics. So it kind of like took me out of the movie the first time I saw that. But now I always kind of laugh when I see it, and I always think it's like, here's this crazy horse mount by Legolas. But again, in a lot of the movies, they kind of want to show that elves, they don't really obey laws of physics that well. They're they have no weight, and so like in the first movie,
standing on the snow.
Exactly, in the first movie when he's Legolas is walking on top of the snow when everybody else is like wading through it. So,
and of course the Hobbit movies when he's just running up the falling rocks.
I think we can all agree that was taken a bit too far.
Oh, look how impressive it is that they added in that CGI.
Yeah, that was a little bit too much in my opinion. But
yeah, we could see what they were going for there.
Exactly, but definitely when he's just wiping out all the wargs with on his own with his bow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it's a really good change. It's intense and it definitely helps break up the movie. You said it was around halfway through, and I think every time we're watching the extended edition, isn't that exactly where the halfway point where you have to switch the discs?
You have to change discs.
But overall that scene, you get some great laughs with Gimli, some ass whooping by Legolas, and great action and great music, and the slow-mo and that lack of sound just before the clash of the wargs and the riders.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. I love how they do that in certain movies, and like I think Peter Jackson does that really well, where it's just like this absolute dead silence before a collision, and it really makes the collision seem even more impressive and even more kind of like
they actually do that really well in Narnia. I don't know if you've seen the line "The Witch in the Wardrobe" or if you've seen it for a long time.
A long time ago. I don't remember.
I remember watching that as a kid, and that was one thing I always loved about the big battle at the end. They have a similar thing with all the, I don't know anything about Narnia really much anymore, but like all the like bad magical beings against all the like good animals and stuff, and just before they clash there's a big silence and then
the Narnia orcs.
Yeah, the Narnia orcs and trolls against, the beautiful eagles and like wolves and whatnot. But yeah, they do it really well in that movie.
Also, I love Theoden's kill of the warg, where he like, shoves his sword into like the mouth nasty. Of one of the wargs, gets him like right in the roof of the mouth. I'm always, every time I see that, I push my tongue up against like the roof of my mouth because it looks painful. I'm like, the poor warg.
Yeah, it's gross. I'm definitely giving a point to Jackson on this one, but again, this isn't to say Tolkien did anything wrong. I just think it's a good addition into the movie, so I'm going to give Jackson a point for this.
I agree. I think it's a really nice addition, and it kind of keeps you. As I said, there's a lot of kind of slow paced parts in the movie, and I think it really kind of
keeps you on your toes.
Keeps you on the edge of your seat, keeps you guessing,
like a midget at a urinal. You have to be on your toes.
I had to keep my toes.
What about breakfast?
So the next change I wanted to talk about was Faramir. This one is one that I found really glaring because when I read the book for the first time, Faramir isn't the most likable guy in the films, in my opinion, but in the book he is portrayed as a really wise and thoughtful character. In the film, his temptation to take the ring nearly overcomes him, and he only changes his mind at the end of the movie due to seeing the madness in Frodo basically overcoming him. The way he treats the hobbits, he captures them, and the way he grabs Gollum's throat and tortures him is a complete deviation from his gentle nature in the book. So I think perhaps Peter Jackson wanted to have the temptation of the ring seem as strong as possible. Like we saw in the third movie, Smeagol killed his own cousin 5 minutes after seeing the ring. So and that was the first time he saw it. So perhaps it would have been a bit contradictory and confusing for audiences if Faramir is just able to resist the ring. It's actually, do you know that scene as well with Galadriel where she like passes the tests and whatever? That's actually supposed to be like very powerful and very impressive for her. But Faramir is just a man. So I do think it would have been very confusing for audiences not knowing the story with Faramir, and he's just able to go, I don't need it.
Yeah, no, that is true. And it was totally understandable that they gave him that kind of role of the guy who's like, okay, and also we kind of know his backstory where he's always trying to impress his father, and like how Boromir's always been the greater brother, and he kind of, and especially in that extended scene where we get in the Two Towers where it shows how, because that's not in the theatrical one, isn't it? When Boromir has like reclaimed as Gilead. That's such a cool scene.
It's such a good scene.
And where Denethor sends Boromir to the Council of Elrond, little plug there.
Shout out to ourselves.
And where basically he's like, no, I'll send your brother, the one who will not fail me. And then later on the whole thing of like a chance for Captain Farmer to prove his worth and all that. So it's definitely plausible in the movie where you can see that he's like, okay, the ring will go to Gondor and all that kind of thing. So I do think that that's understandable from the character. And again, as you say, you don't have so much time in a movie as you do in a book to build the background of a character. So
films can't tell the backstory that a book can, really.
I mean, I've absolutely no problem with the choices that Peter Jackson made in that situation. However, I do think that Faramir in the books is, as you said, he's a much more likable character, and it's one of my favorite parts of the Two Towers is Faramir and his kind of like interrogation of Frodo, and how they have these like long discussions, and the dialogue is just so well written, and he just seems so wise and so intelligent, and he's like trying to like pull the truth out of Frodo, and it's just really, really well written the way he does it. So I kind of would have liked to have seen that Faramir displayed as well, but as I said, you can't win them all.
Yeah, and when you're watching the movies and you meet Faramir for the first time, I always kind of farmer. When you meet the farmer,
Maggot.
Faramir Maggot, brilliant. I don't know. I always kind of cringe a little bit when I see Faramir at first, because he's just a dick, like, and you know that he becomes much better, and you know he has his whole little character arc to overcome, and you're just kind of like, oh, come on, I want to see Faramir from the third movie. So I remember reading the book for the first time, and I was pleasantly surprised at how much I enjoyed those scenes with Faramir.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed them, and I thought he was really cool in the books. Probably like a contender for favorite side character, if that's a thing.
Secondary character, like definitely. As I said, I always remember those chapters like as just being really, really cool parts of the book, where it's like, normally if you're trying to explain to somebody, okay, what happens in this chapter, and it's like, okay, in this chapter it's the Battle of Helm's Deep or whatever, and you're kind of like, oh, obviously that's going to be a cool chapter. But if you're telling somebody in this chapter it's going to be a lot of conversation and dialogue between Faramir and Frodo, and not really a lot happens, and trying to tell somebody, but it's actually going to be like one of the coolest chapters in the book. I think it's really incredible writing the way that Tolkien did that.
Yeah, but in reality, Faramir is able to resist in spite of the ring's temptation because of his righteousness, honor, and his, quote, pure blood of Númenor. And in the book, The Two Towers, the chapter The Window in the West, Faramir says to Frodo, "But fear no more, I would not take this thing if it lay by the highway, not were Minas Tirith falling in ruin and I alone could save her. So, using the weapon of the Dark Lord for her good and my glory." So he does say something similar to his father in the film adaptation after he's redeemed himself, but the difference is that he doesn't have his whole character arc that Jackson included. So yeah, like we were talking about.
Yeah, so it's kind of similar. It's kind of similar to Elrond's change as well. So that like they give him a different starting point in the movies in order to give him this arc, and it needs to be a kind of a quick arc from one movie to the next movie. Whereas in the books, as we said, Elrond already liked Aragorn from the beginning, so he didn't need this big change of personality and this arc. And similarly, they're saying like Faramir at the beginning when we first meet him, he's kind of this not very likable guy. He takes the hobbits captive and whatever, and kind of like, you know, obstructs their journey. So again, he takes them captive in the book as well, but he's just more of a dick, like I suppose, in the movies. So they give him that arc as well. So again, it's those kind of visual arcs that you can see in a movie, and in you know the short storytelling that is a movie is definitely understandable.
Yeah, and it definitely added to the Frodo and Sam scenes, because Peter Jackson probably wanted some antagonist for Frodo and Sam rather than their scenes just being all walking and talking, and it's hard to portray the mental duress that Frodo is under in a movie, unlike the way you can in a book. So, because a lot of the Two Towers book is Frodo kind of having mental battles instead of Faramir battles. So
that battle was mental.
Yeah, it was a pure mental battle. But I definitely prefer book Faramir as a character, but I like the changes to the story to add tension for Frodo and Sam scenes. But if I had to choose, if someone was saying who do you prefer, Faramir from the movies or Faramir from the book, it's definitely Faramir from the book. I almost said movie.
From the which was it again? Yeah, no, I agree about it completely. Yeah, I definitely agree with you that I think that book Faramir is just a more likable character, and he's just obviously a better written character, but that's because Tolkien he was J.R.R. Tolkien, Professor Tolkien, so he was pretty good at writing things.
Decent.
But then secondly, he had the luxury of time on his hands to be able, or well, not just time, but actual pages to be able to develop the character more and to show you this kind of different character. So yeah, I would prefer to hang out with that Faramir.
Yeah, definitely.
War will make corpses of us all.
So the next biggest change I want to talk about is probably the most noticeable one is the Battle of Helm's Deep. It was one of the biggest shocks for me when I read the books, because the entire battle fits into one tiny little chapter, whereas it's the biggest set piece and takes up almost the entire third act of the movie. It's also another big thing in the book is that it's divided up between Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli one half, Frodo, Sam in the second half, and Helm's Deep is chapter 7. Like, so you think of the finale of the Two Towers, and that comes in the seventh chapter. I just think it was really weird. But there's so many changes in the actual battle as well, like the fact that it adds Haldir and the Elven army showing up just before the battle, whereas in the book Legolas only wishes that his kinsmen were there with bows to help. Like the previous change we talked about as well, this is another way the film dramatizes Elrond's
Dramatizes.
dramatizes. So it's another way the film dramatizes Elrond's change of heart towards Aragorn and other men, because, like we previously discussed, Elrond has a bit of an arc, and this way of him sending some elves is kind of like, oh, he's in support of saving men and helping them out. And that is, of course, if Elrond was the one that was in charge sending them over there, I'm sure he had dealings, or he is the final say on which elves get sent to battle, because most of them are leaving for the Undying Lands. So I assume he made this choice. If not, then never mind.
The end has come.
Haldir also is killed in the battle, whereas in the novel he isn't talked about again after the Fellowship leaves Lothlorien, and his fate is actually unknown. But it does give us a little sad cry moment.
Haldir.
Yeah, no, that's a sad moment, even though, you know,
It is, yeah.
you only really see the character for a little bit.
It's amazing how like emotionally attached you can get to Haldir in such a short time. You don't really know who he is, and you're like, what's that guy's name again? And then you see him die, and you're like, oh no.
Oh dear, Haldir.
Haldir, you die.
Yeah, no, I do think it's the music and everything, the slow motion death, and the fact that Aragorn gives him a little hug.
Yeah, and also the fact that as he's dying, he's looking around and he sees all of his like brethren, all of his like elvish kinsmen, and they're all like, he's dying and he doesn't know what the outcome is going to be, and all he can see is death around him, and it's kind of it's not the best way to go.
It's great directing, you have to admit. Just the way you described it there, I was like, yeah, that's completely what Peter Jackson was aiming for, I'd imagine. Tolkien perhaps wouldn't have liked this addition, as a large theme in all the books is the elves fading in the Third Age and leaving for the Undying Lands. It also really shows the strength and resilience of men when there are no reinforcements of elves. So that's probably, I think in some of the forums, again from 2002 that I was reading through, a lot of people were saying, oh, it's kind of dumb that they added elves in, because, you know, the men are supposed to show how strong they are, but they were saved.
Yeah, and again, there's a lot of changes in Helm's Deep, and of course, we see that in the movies there's only like a couple of hundred men, and then they really need the reinforcements from the elves. But in the book, I believe there's about 2,000 men in Helm's Deep. So it's still 2,000 against more than 10,000. So it's a pretty impressive victory. But
tens of thousands.
They definitely make it seem like they really, really need the help from the elves in that situation. So it's like and again, it's, well, you and I, we both saw the movies before we read the books. So we were like, oh, this is class. And then when we read the books, we were like, oh, so the elves didn't even go. So I've got no like bad feelings against that scene and the way that Peter Jackson did it. But I can see totally how if I had grown up reading the books and I had this like thing of, like you said, how the elves kind of faded away, and like this scene was like showing the power of the men in this moment. I could see how going to see the movie and like seeing the elves getting involved, and just you're kind of, this isn't true to what Tolkien wanted or whatever. I mean, I could see how people would have those feelings, and I could definitely understand people that are maybe don't like it and frustrated with it. But me personally, I think it's badass when those elves show up, and we get to see them in their kind of like military, their formations and the way they march in, and they all turn and they like smash their bows onto the ground at the same time, and it's like so cool.
Yeah, it is cool, and I do think what you said there, Tolkien purists would probably have been going into these movies expecting to see very little of elves and kind of thinking anytime you see a glimpse of an elf, it might be like, oh, so magical and mystical. And that might have kind of taken away from it a little bit, but that's what we grew up with and I've always loved it. But looking back, yeah, I could understand people not liking that change.
Sure, and I think if you're a fan of any book, if you're a big fan of a book and then you go and watch that like a adaptation, I don't think you're ever going to be completely satisfied, because if you've grown up reading a book, you're going to have an idea in your brain. You're going to be like, okay, I think that Aragorn looks like this. And I mean, you could have something quite similar, but if it's not exactly what you've pictured growing up all your life, you can never really take on the form of like Viggo Mortensen and say, okay, right, now this is Aragorn. So you're going to be like, you're going to have that sort of internal conflict between what you've grown up believing Aragorn to look like in your own mind. And so again, a benefit for us to have seen it in the movies before we read the books is we get these ideas of these characters from what Peter Jackson gave us, and then we went and read the books. And when it mentions Aragorn or Theoden or anyone, I get in my brain, I'm like, he's talking about Aragorn, I'm thinking about Viggo Mortensen. Or, you know, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I wouldn't like to think of any other person. Yeah.
I always think of Viggo Mortensen.
I mean, I think about him daily, just while I'm, you know, eating my cornflakes in the morning or whatever. But
Viggo.
Here Viggo.
No, yeah, that's very interesting, and I'd love to ask some of the listeners if there are any people that have read the books before. I
thought you were going to say ask the listeners if there are any. It's just you and me here, buddy.
Yeah. We're just talking to ourselves. I'd love to ask the listeners if there are any people that have. Sorry, I keep thinking about that now.
That's fine.
I'd like to ask the listeners as well if there are any people that read the books before the movies. I'm sure there's plenty of you out there. What did you think of the elves coming? Was that annoying, or have you grown fond of it now? But yeah, that's really interesting.
No, I'd say that's a good question. I'd like to hear from our listeners as well on that point, because I don't know that many people. I haven't had too many conversations with people that are Tolkien fans who aren't fans of the movie. Like I don't know that many people who are like only kind of mainly are originally book fans. Yeah. Just because of maybe people in our age category, we kind of watched the movies and then that brought us into the books. So I don't really.
But there's plenty out there.
No, of course there are plenty out there, and obviously there are. But I haven't had that many like interactions with them, like, and had conversations. And I'd like to, because I'd like to get the opinions of those people. Because I, as I said, I could totally imagine like going into a movie with an idea of something in your head and then not getting exactly that, and just being a little bit, maybe feeling a little bit like flat or let down. Definitely get in touch. Yeah.
They changed a couple of other things in that battle. Like, well, first of all, Éomer is not even in the battle in the films, and him fighting side by side with Aragorn was awesome.
Their bromance between Aragorn and Éomer is so good.
And also, do you know the way Éomer kind of gets off on the wrong foot with Gimli when they first meet, but they have that little moment where Éomer trips and falls during the retreat, but is saved by Gimli, and it's kind of like tip of the hat, kind of thank you, brother. Like, I love that little, yeah, I love that little interaction between the two.
Yeah.
But yeah, so what would you think? Would you prefer book Helm's Deep or film Helm's Deep?
I mean, you know, I'm gonna have to go film Helm's Deep, because like,
it's one of the best battles of all time.
Yeah, like it doesn't matter. Like, one of the biggest things I could compare it to is the fact that it's 20 years old, and when you see that compared to the Winterfell battle in Game of Thrones, it's like they tried to shoot a battle at nighttime, and in what was that, 2019, I suppose, and they just like they just couldn't get it right at all. You couldn't see anything. It was, and like for me, when I saw that, it was like it made it even more impressive. Like just the way that they filmed it. Never mind like the length of the battle and like the choreography that was involved. Just the way that it was at nighttime, but everything was so clear, yet it seemed natural.
Well,
and
it's interesting that you bring that up, that Battle of Winterfell, because I remember before it came out, when it was being filmed, I was reading that it was this is a battle that took like 3 months to film or something crazy. It was like the longest ever action scene ever filmed. And
were they taking inspiration from the Battle of Helm's Deep?
and I was just about to say that, yeah, they were taking inspiration from the Battle of Helm's Deep, and there were so many things saying, oh, the producer or the owner of HBO has seen this battle, and he said it's the greatest thing of all time. It's so much better than Helm's Deep. But then when it came out, like what you said, people were like, I can't really see what's going on, and they were like, no, it's supposed to be ultra realistic because Helm's Deep had this blue light, and the moonlight wouldn't be that like bright, and
yeah, but when I'm watching Game of Thrones, I'm not watching it for the purpose of like wanting it to be reality. I'm not like, you know what? Though in reality, those dragons wouldn't have even been there. You know,
exactly.
I'm like, yeah, but I'm trying to watch this to escape reality.
Exactly. And if they want to have it ultra real, then they may as well just like plop me in the middle of a battle and have me screaming and not hear anything. May as well cut off my arms and legs. Yeah, no, you have to have the viewers be able to see the battle.
Yeah, I remember thinking that there was something wrong with like my brightness setting on my TV. I was like, oh, maybe
everybody did,
yeah. I was like, what's going on? Like adjust the brightness ratio.
Yeah, I remember watching it in the middle of the day because it came out at 2:00 in the morning every Monday morning here, and we would always record it, and then we'd get up and watch it the next day. And I had a couple of friends over, and like because it would always be bright, we would always close the curtains and turn on the TV and watch Game of Thrones. But this time I think it was a particularly sunny day, and the sun was still kind of coming through the curtains. I was like, oh, maybe I can't see a lot just because it's daytime and it'll be fine at nighttime. But no, everyone had the same problems. But
so anyway, yeah, that's another thing. Just that's nothing to do with how amazing the Battle at Helm's Deep is in terms of the way it's portrayed in the movies and the choreography of it, as I said, which is incredible. Just another thing is the actual like the filmography of it or just the way that it's been shot, the way that the visual effects team, the way that they just basically made it seem so realistic, but also visible at least.
Thank God for allowing us to see the battle on the TV.
Well, I mean, obviously that was just like that wasn't even a thought before, but then after seeing the kind of the mess up of at the battle at Winterfell, I was like, oh, obviously that's a huge win for the way that Peter Jackson and his team actually shot that.
So the next change I wanted to talk about was Shelob and the voice of Saruman. There are many scenes switched around in the books and movies, but this Two Towers book is really action-packed when you consider the very first chapter, Boromir dies, and the finale of the movie Helm's Deep isn't even halfway into the book. So you can see, and it includes Shelob and it includes Saruman. So the omission of Shelob and placing it in the third movie and the voice of Saruman scene to the extended edition of the third movie was a big change. Especially when I went back and read the books, and I was like, what? This is all happening in the second book? This is awesome.
Yeah.
I really think that the Two Towers book ending is so tense, and it ends on such a bittersweet moment as Frodo is stabbed by Shelob's pointed stinger, and the reader, well, I remember thinking, oh, he's dead, and then straight away Sam realizes, oh, Frodo's not dead after all, but he's captured and taken away by the orcs. So I was kind of like, oh, is it going to end on a big cliffhanger? Do we think that Frodo's going to be dead? But no, but it was still really good. Jackson also said, and quote, if we stayed it... No, never mind. Jackson also said, and I quote, if we started Return of the King after Shelob, the way the books do, there'd be very little for Frodo and Sam to do. So again, for pacing reasons, he decided to split up the movies. And the ending of the film has Smeagol, who has completely reverted back to his evil Gollum, planning to kill the hobbits, as Smeagol references her. In case I botched that. Sorry, I had something stuck in my throat there. Oh, there
maybe tell us that she could do it.
She could do it. Oh, I can't.
That was good enough. That was good enough for me.
She could do it.
Yeah, but I thought that was a massive difference that they had Shelob and Boromir. I didn't really specify that too much, but yeah, Boromir dying at the start, that was crazy.
Yeah, because I always remember that when I go back and read the Fellowship, and I kind of going, oh yeah, that whole like battle at Amon Hen doesn't even happen. It doesn't even happen in the first book. So I'm always like coming to the end of the book, I'm like, how are we going to fit that part in? And I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
wait, it's not.
You're
it's
getting
not,
the
it's not
tissues
in.
ready, and you're like, oh,
Exactly, yeah. And
what a way to start the next book. Like, everything's happy,
Yeah.
happy-go-lucky. And the first chapter, I think, is the departure of Boromir, and you're like, oh.
Yeah. Where's he going?
Yeah.
But actually, going back to something that you said a moment ago as well about not just about Sheila, but about the voice of Saruman. I think that again, that's one of my favorite chapters. That's possibly my favorite chapter in the Two Towers book. It's so cool. And Saruman, you don't really know about his power in the movies, and you don't really get to see the way the power of his voice. That's probably his biggest strength. And he's like a politician, but he's like just stirring people up. And he's like, we get a small glimpse of it in the movie where we see he's like convincing the wild people that live in he's getting people to come and fight for him. And we see some like wild man cutting his hand and swearing an oath to Saruman, and then Saruman giving a bit of a speech, which is kind of a bit of like, we see a small bit, but we don't really get to see how he uses his voice to like, just kind of like poison the minds of people. And he's just so convincing in the way he speaks. And he's just like some sort of like, as I said, really convincing politician that you're kind of like, oh, wow, I really believe this guy. And he's got my best interests at heart. But in fact, he's completely out for his own gain. And that's such a cool part of the book.
Yeah, do you remember when Aragorn said that in the Two Towers film as well? He said, do not let him speak. His very voice will put a curse on you, or something like that. So that's another glimpse of where you hear how much he could curse you by just speaking. And I think that's pretty cool.
He put a spell on you.
So which do you prefer, Jackson's layout or Tolkien's layout?
I like... Again, I can see the reason for changes in terms of Jackson putting some of those things, especially like Sheila saving her for the third movie and putting Boromir's death at the end of the first movie. I can see the reasons for it, but I really love the way that the second book is laid out. And I remember like when you read the first book, it's kind of like, of course it's building the story a little bit, and it's a little bit more slow paced. There are some, again, I really think it's a great book, the first book, but I think when you read the second book, it's like you can't put it down. It's just like there's so much going on. And as I said, that chapter with Faramir and that chapter, The Voice of Saruman, I think those are two of like the best chapters I've read in any book. Just like they're like, I was just completely gripped and couldn't I was glued to the page, and it was really, really well put. So I'd give that one to Tolkien.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'd give that to Tolkien as well. Especially, I remember somebody telling me before I read the books, oh, it's divided in two halves, so it's all the fun stuff in the first half, and the second half is all the Frodo and Sam stuff. And first of all, I was like, well, Frodo and Sam are awesome. But secondly, I didn't realize that it had Shelob and so many other little things in it. So that was a pleasant surprise. So yeah, for the Two Towers, I'd definitely go for Tolkien on this one.
I agree.
Dead. No, you cannot kill them, no.
So finally, the last one I want to talk about is the Eye of Sauron, which is kind of a big change. In the films, as we know, Sauron was defeated, but his spirit endured, and he is represented as a big giant eyeball on the Tower of Barad-dûr. So this was a complete invention by Peter Jackson. In fact, Sauron having a body is very heavily implied in Tolkien's books. We mentioned last week that Gollum describes Sauron as having 9 fingers. In chapter 4 of The Return of the King, Denethor also says to Pippin, "He will not come save only to triumph over me when all is won." I believe also in the appendices it also talks about him taking shape in Dol Guldur. So it is implied that he has a body. It's just not talked about that much. It's kind of vague again by Tolkien. But yeah, what Sauron actually looked like is also left fairly vague. But when talking about a potential confrontation with Aragorn, Tolkien says this: "Sauron should be thought of as very terrible. The form that he took was that of a man, more than human in stature, but not gigantic."
All right. He was human, really big, but not gigantic.
Yeah.
So he didn't have giganticism or anything.
The Elephant Man, Sauron. The Moomical Man.
He was just a big, he was just like Shaquille O'Neal or something like that. Like.
Yeah, no, I saw somewhere as well on one of these forums how Sauron was talked about. I'm not sure was it in the books, or I can't remember, to be honest, because I didn't write it down, but he was mentioned to be like pacing in the Tower of Barad-dûr. So it seems like he was around during the War of the Ring, which is kind of interesting, because the whole threat of the movies is that if the ring gets back to Sauron, he will come back in his full form again. But it doesn't say that in the books at all. He actually already is a formed man.
In the books it's just kind of like he needs the ring to be able to have the kind of the power to be able to control the other rings, but it doesn't say anything about him needing the ring to regain his physical form. That's completely created by Peter Jackson. I think that the fact that eye, the eye of Sauron, the fact that that's become like so synonymous with the Lord of the Rings is a huge like win for Peter Jackson.
Yeah,
that's incredible how he's had. That's probably, maybe in my opinion, the biggest influence that Peter Jackson had on the Lord of the Rings. Because if you tell somebody that hasn't read the books that eye isn't a part of the books, and that like it's not this like burning flaming eye or whatever, that's like that whole like wreathed in flame or whatever as Saruman says, that's so cool, like the way that he came up with that. Like I can imagine them in the writer's room, and somebody's like doing a little sketch of this flaming eye, and they're like and he's just like, oh yeah, that's class. I can't do a bit.
Yeah, I've always wondered how he pitched the idea, because when I heard that wasn't in the book, it just sounds like such a Tolkien thing to do, to have a big giant flaming eyeball in the sky. But like, how did he go, right, yeah, we're going to have a big flaming eye and it's going to be awesome? Like, what was the pitch there? Who was it, Miramax? How did they accept that?
New Line Cinema.
Do Miramax also have an involvement? I don't know. New Line.
Yeah, no, it's definitely like such a cool visual thing that's really kind of become one of those like staples of Lord of the Rings. That kind of like if you want to buy a Lord of the Rings poster or something, it's like, or if you're anywhere in the world and you see that the image of that flaming eye, everyone's like, "Oh, that's Lord of the Rings." More like, I mean, if you saw an image of, I don't know, like the sword Anduril or something like that, maybe people, if you see that, like, and you're not a huge fan of Lord of the Rings, you see that sword and you're like, oh, I'm not sure what that's from. But if you see that flaming eye, there's no doubt, like, it doesn't matter if you're a big fan of Lord of the Rings or if you've only seen one of the movies, you're going to be like, oh, that's from Lord of the Rings, of course. And so it's really become so synonymous with the movies and so.
Yeah, and I have seen people's artwork, and I think that game Shadow of Mordor, people have their own take on Barad-dûr. And when you see Barad-dûr and there's no flaming eye at the top, you're like, that's not Barad-dûr. What is this? And like, it's weird to see the landscape. Crap-a-dûr, exactly. It's weird to see Mordor without that big flame ball eye in the sky. I don't know. Like what you said, it's synonymous with Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, and I could see where he probably got the idea from, or whoever got the idea. I don't know if it was Peter Jackson himself who had that. It could have been anyone from his team.
Could have been Ted Naismith that came up with that little idea as well. One of the illustrators, or Alan Lee.
His artwork is class. Because they say in the book, they do speak about like how Sauron has I'm trying to remember what they say. They say something about he's like far seeing, and he can see a lot of what's happening from the Tower of Barad-dûr. And it's kind of like, it kind of gives this idea that he has this kind of this far sight and this far reach. But this whole thing of flaming eye is completely taken it to another level.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the Eye of Sauron is actually mentioned many times in the books. However, it's probably more like his watchful eye in terms of, well, either the use of the Palantir or the fact that he had magically enhanced vision, similar to the Dunedain, but probably much better. Like you said, his all-seeing eye from the Tower of Barad-dûr.
And maybe his eye as well could be reference to like any of his spies that are like numerous and all over the world. That like, as in, you could be like hanging out in, I don't know, Rohan, and there's some spy there and he sees something and then he reports it back to Sauron. So that's, again, Sauron has sight in Rohan or wherever. So maybe that was a part of Sauron's
like
eye.
Sauron didn't trust. Well, yeah, he had many spies out there, but for the most part, he didn't trust his orcs to carry out his mission. Instead, he puts his will on the generals, for example, the Ringwraiths and the Mouth of Sauron. So it is interesting how they're spread out. They could be in the Shire, they could be in Rivendell, they could be wherever, and it's kind of the eye of Sauron, his all-seeing vision and all that. But yeah, hitting the nail on the head. I have to include one other thing though that I saw in a forum. Somebody said in The Hobbit, The Desolation of Smaug, they represented Sauron fairly well. He has a body but envelops himself in fire, creating the eye illusion. And I thought that was a really cool thing in The Hobbit. It didn't need to be there at all, but it was cool to see Sauron standing there, and then the flame around him, and then it kind of zooms out a million times and you just see the eye of Sauron. I was like, oh, that's really cool visuals right there.
Was that when he was like fighting against like the White Council with Saruman and Galadriel in that part?
Yeah, I think so. I'm pretty sure it's when Gandalf is held up against the wall, and then but does that scene, I think those scenes are around the same time. I don't know. I have to go back and watch that movie. I have to watch The Hobbits again. Yeah,
it's been a while since I've seen The Hobbits. But yeah, there's definitely a couple of times in those movies where we see Sauron in a different form like that. Because I think when I was saying, when you see the council, like the White Council, and they're, well, just a couple of members of them, like Elrond and Galadriel and Saruman and Gandalf, and they're like together fighting against the Nazgul, and then Galadriel eventually like banishes Sauron from there, or she does some crazy witch power thing and gets rid of him. Yeah. And I think in that scene we see a kind of an outline of his human form as well, or his actual body. Yeah. But again, it's just completely like black and shadowy, and maybe the kind of eye thing is around him, or the flames at least are around him. Yeah. If memory serves, which it probably doesn't. Well. But,
no, I think you described it beautifully, sir. That's when Galadriel became the Scarlet Witch as well.
That makes you the Scarlet Witch.
So do you like this edition by Peter Jackson?
Yeah, I think it's class. I think it's such a cool visual thing. And when the first time I found out that it wasn't in the books, I was like, I'm really disappointed, because it's like, that's such a cool idea of this just big burning flame eye. It's like so badass.
I was curious as well how they were going to describe it in the books, or how it was going to be a thing. You know, it's kind of weird to think about this big flaming ball, but and you're completely right with what you said. It's iconic, that visual from the movies. This change definitely makes the Tower of Barad-dûr seem much more important as well, and also you know the difference between that and Minas Morgul, and
it's like, which tower is that again? It's the one with the big flaming eyeball that sees through rock and flesh and everything. It's like yeah, I remember that one.
I see.
Well, that's all from us this time on the Council of Elrond. Thanks for listening, we really do appreciate it. If you'd like to help us out even more, please give us a 5-star review, share and subscribe. We would also love to hear from you guys on these differences and what other changes you would have included. Is there another change that you would have liked to hear us discuss? Did Jackson nail it in your opinion, or is there no way to compete with the greatest fantasy writer of all time? You can let us know on our social media, so please get in touch on Twitter, Facebook or Instagram. That's it for today, but we will chat to you next time for part 3 of Tolkien vs. Jackson.